Afternoon, everybody. My name's Cam Watts, and I care about primary elections. So did everybody follow the New York City mayoral primary last year? Pretty spicy race. Political newcomers Zoran Mamdani squaring off against former Governor Andrew Cuomo. Probably one of the most publicized and watched races in recent memory. But despite that, still less than a third of registered Democrats in New York actually participated and voted in that primary. But if we bring that closer to home here in Philadelphia in 2023, our last mayoral primary, also pretty contested race, only 27% of registered Democrats voted in that primary as well. And because we're a city dominated by the Democratic Party, only pretty much anybody who runs and wins in the Democratic primary is guaranteed to go on to win the general election. And that meant that about 8% of registered voters in Philadelphia effectively decided the race. That's the 80,000 people who voted for Mayor Cheryl Parker in that primary election. And despite what you think about Mayor Parker, I found that statistic to be pretty concerning. It's also not just in major urban cities in mayoral elections. It's happening all across the country. So in the upcoming congressional races in this year, Cook Political Report estimates that only about 14% of those congressional races will be competitive at all. So for me, I was really curious about who these voters are that are effectively deciding all of our elections, like over 80% of them. So there is a good bit of research on that, and I think Nelson Polsby, who was one of the foremost scholars on the presidential nomination process, summarizes it pretty well here, which is primary voters are better educated, they're better off, better organized, more ideological, more partisan, just generally different than the general electorate. And so if you guys voted in the primary last year, you should probably take a look in the mirror. I probably need to as well. I'm giving this presentation. Anyways, my primary concern is a little bit different, though. I was interested in seeing how primary voters are cognitively different than the general electorate. So in other words, what can political psychology teach us about how primary voters think and how they learn and how they make decisions? And more importantly, how can that help us understand the state of democracy in America today? So one of the first guys, political scientist Philip Converse was one of the first to start thinking about political cognition. And he came up, or his landmark research really helped us understand that educated voters held the most stable and logically consistent belief systems. So he created this concept of constraint. So to be constrained, you hold political beliefs that are all kind of in alignment with each other. So if we take a Democratic voter, if you believe in higher taxes and more welfare, more immigration, unions, if you hold all those beliefs all at the same time, that makes you a constrained voter. And in Converse's opinion, that makes you a better voter. And that might be okay. I mean, it kind of makes sense. Policy is really hard. So maybe the more ideological or more educated among us have a better time understanding the nuanced relationship between policy and how they all work together. And that's probably particularly true in primary elections, where voters are differentiating between candidates who are much more similar to each other, instead of a general electorate where voters are differentiating between major parties. And while that may seem nice in a room full of highly educated people, there's a lot of research to kind of confront that as well. And newer research that has come up past Converse, I think goes further to suggest that actually the more ideological, partisan, educated voters, our primary voters, actually are more likely to be stubborn and entrenched in their own belief systems as well. So two researchers, Brandt and Sleegers in 2021, came up with a new model. One that's based on nodes for each belief. So in our brains, we have a node, let's say for Republican, and that's connected to lower taxes and maybe conservatism, an elephant and the color red. But the key insight here, I think, is that the more educated, the more engaged that you become, the more your node is connected, and therefore the harder it is to update that prior belief, that core belief, with any new information. So primary voters are effectively literally entrenching themselves in all of the knowledge that they have. And if you layer this on with a lot of research on motivated reasoning, that really compounds upon itself as well. So motivated reasoning is the cognitive bias, where we accept new information that confirms our belief without really any critique at all. But any new information that conflicts with our prior beliefs, we do pretty much everything we can to dispel and invalidate that. So two of the leading researchers here, Epley and Gilovich, really describe these two standards of can I believe this versus must I believe this? And our primary voters are really asking themselves, must I believe this a lot more often? So there's a lot of research on this, but I don't have a ton of time. So to emphasize this, just recall, a weird conversation you've had with your uncle at Thanksgiving where he thinks the world is a dome and he tries to disprove all of your facts about physics and things. That's motivated reasoning and action. Your uncle might be right, though. He could be. But I think what's important is this has a real impact on our politics as well. So we're all probably familiar with the concept of being primaried, or a politician being primaried. And there's some really great research coming out of Johns Hopkins from Hari Han that emphasizes that, or that shows that politicians are shifting their policy agendas to better map to primary voters as well. So the more entrenched our primary voters are, the more entrenched our politics are becoming as well. So what do we do about that? We all moved to Alaska because it's beautiful up there. But it's also the only state that has what we would consider to be the ideal primary party system. So they have top 4 nonpartisan primaries, which gets rid of the party separate ballots for different parties, puts everyone on one ballot, and then the top 4 vote getters move on to a general election where we have ranked choice voting to ensure that there's no spoiler effect and that the winning candidate has actually earned a majority of support from that entire community. So in 2022, when they actually implemented this, they've seen a ton of great outcomes from that, including increased voter turnout, increased competition, and also more independent candidates running and winning in those elections. So as I kind of come to the conclusion here, I want to take us back to New York. And after losing the primary election, Andrew Cuomo decided to run as a third-party candidate, which effectively created a top 3 primary system in New York for that one election. And so we saw and got to experience what it's like to have a truly competitive election where a lot of tens of thousands of New Yorkers who typically don't have a real choice in a general election got to participate. And so my hope is that we can spread nonpartisan primaries across the country and ultimately help our politics become less polarized and less entrenched. Thank you.